Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for
How are you
joining us
guys?
today.
How's Jakarta?
Oh,
But
Jakarta
it's hot.
is, it's not as beautiful as Bali, I'm
Nope.
sure, the weather-wise. But let's get into our conversation. We've talked about coral reefs, but tell us about living seas.
So Living Sea started out in Singapore as a scuba diving company, so we were
Okay.
doing tourism. But having traveled around the region for quite a few years, I've seen a lot of change happen with the coral reefs, and I noticed that the reef doesn't come back on its own. You go to places year after year, and you see that it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Watching it on TV, I think it's a little bit different than seeing it for yourself with your own eyes. And that's when I realized, I want to do something about the reefs. So coral conservation was always something that we had at the heart of what we do. And when the pandemic started, no tourism, that's when we decided to go full on with planting the reef.
That's
That's
a
what you
good.
see in the video there.
Okay,
It
so
is
you
great,
actually,
isn't
the
it?
process is replanting it then,
Yeah.
right? You cannot just, it won't just grow back on its own.
So you took
Yes,
the
unfortunately.
you took the right momentum to start during the pandemic because there are less tourists, flying out and
Right.
going diving during the pandemic. But can you give us a brief report on what is currently the condition of the coral reef, specifically in Bali? Because you're currently in Bali. What do you think?
Yes. So in Padang Bai, where I'm based, we do get pretty good water. So we do have some areas with still quite a lot of nice coral and a lot of reef. However, there's a lot of places that also have a lot of impact from chemical pollution, fertilizer runoff, and algae overblooms, and of course, tourism impact as well. So a lot of places you don't see a lot of nice coral or fish, and it's all just a coral rubble patch. So just dead coral all over the place, which is quite sad to see, really.
Right. So let's break it down a little bit. What is the process of coral protection? So, for example, do you identify certain areas that need to be reinvigorated, and then from that point, what is the process that you go through?
Right. So we identify a few areas that we think can be restored,
Okay.
and we ask that coral will grow there. And then what we do is we create a metal structure, which you saw in the video.
Okay.
We make that and produce that in Padang Bai itself, and we what do you call that? We bring it out, and then we find live coral that's broken by mechanical damage. Well, they're still alive, but they're lying on the floor. So if they roll around in the waves, eventually they will die. So what we've done is we find these kind of corals, and then we bring them over to the new site, and we kind of give them a second chance at life by attaching them to these structures and allowing them to grow again.
Okay, so it's just because they're like dying, there's still a chance you can bring them back. Kind of like plants, I guess. If
yeah,
you
yeah.
talk about like regular plants at home, you see your
Yeah.
plant is
Exactly,
dying.
yes.
Yeah, you can just nurse it back to life.
Yeah. And also it's because then you're attaching these corals to new sites, right? So they can grow on the older. Is that how you revive, the coral sites? And how long does it take to recover a coral, for instance, condition, in your perspective?
So the coral fragments that we put down are pretty much about a finger size, so they're not very big.
Okay.
And then over a year, they tend to grow out. They grow new branches, they grow longer. And in about 1.5 years, they start to cover the entire structure.
Wow,
And then that's
fast.
when really the fish start to come back. We have sites that are 3-4 years old that you cannot even see that there is a structure underneath. It looks completely natural.
Okay.
And all the fish, the whole ecosystem is back.
Right. So at the top of our discussion, we mentioned some numbers which I find rather alarming. For example, Kai mentioned that these coral reefs were losing it at about 14% rate. And a quarter of all marine life do live in these corals. So what is the condition like now for the progression of this conservation? For example, are we making any progress? Is there a chance still to save most of these corals from these bleaching events that we have seen take place over the last few years?
So the lucky thing we have here in Bali is that we're close to quite deep water. So the water temperature is generally quite cold,
Okay.
and that allows the coral to not grow healthy and not bleach so much. So we're lucky in that respect, but I think global warming is a larger effect. It's hard to combat without doing anything about carbon emissions. What we have found is that by allowing the corals to grow, we bring back marine biodiversity, which you can see in the video about fish there. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So uh, the scalability is tricky in terms of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand, but it's also, correct me if I'm wrong, if the water is too warm, it also causes natural bleaching of the coral. So either way, we have to, one, revive the corals that are, revive the corals for the ecosystem, but also we're at risk because of global warming. So that is actually quite alarming. So it's like a double-edged sword
Yeah.
towards the process, and the only way to do it is if we can cut emissions. But how do you see, contributions that the people have made so far? How do you see this impact the conservation of corals in this world? Do you think that we're able to conserve the 14% that we perhaps have lost in the last 10 years?
So what I think is there's a lot of effort that's being done by different projects around the region and around the world, actually. And I think we haven't really hit our stride yet. Coral, in a sense, hasn't gotten the awareness that the terrestrial conservation has. Because I think it's much easier to imagine saving a tree and planting a forest than it is to rebuild an entire reef. So awareness, I think, is one very key aspect that things that we do on land also affect our oceans. So a lot of people don't connect those dots. A lot of times people don't, when they look at the ocean, they see this flat, blue, beautiful sea, but they don't see what's below. So it's not just corals bleaching, it's also plastic waste that kills the coral. It's also the biggest storms that we get because of climate change. And of course, tourism direct impact. So quite a few things that I think can be worked on. But I think with good awareness, such as having me on this show, helps introduce people to the idea that a lot of stuff that we do on land also affects the oceans.
So, Leon, let's dive a little bit deeper, no pun intended, into that. You mentioned, the things we can do to kind of mitigate climate change, but that can directly impact. And for tourism, what are some of the things that we here in the city, we're not lucky enough to be as close to the waters like you. However, we do visit from time to time as tourists. So what are some of the tips for us to remember when either we live in the city or we do visit out there into the ocean?
So I think personal things that we can do is try to reduce plastic waste. Because plastic production is also contributing to climate change, and also the plastics themselves. Eventually, everything ends up in the ocean. So from the incineration of plastic to just dumping plastic into the rivers, and eventually that flows out into the ocean. All of that affects the reefs. So apart from that, I think when you go to a place like Bali or you go to Coral Reef, it's important to be mindful of not touching, of not using too much sunscreen that can damage.
Oh wow,
coral as
really?
well.
Never thought of that.
Yeah, that's quite a because there's a lot of chemicals in sunscreen.
Right.
And the corals need sun to survive. So if they get coated with sunscreen, then it's not going to be good for
Oh, right. Good point. Never thought
So
of
we
that.
can't wear sunscreen.
I mean, I wear
Yes,
sunscreen on the
yeah.
beach, but remember not to go in the water. Then,
Yeah.
well, you have it on. Yeah, that's
Wow.
a very good
them.
point.
I mean, there are reef-safe options, so non-chemical based, organic-based sunscreens.
Ah.
Okay.
So I think if we all make the choice to use those instead, I think that would be better for the reefs.
Oh.
In fact, there are areas in Bali that kind of recovered a little bit on their own during the 2 years when there were no tourists.
Yeah.
And then now we're starting to see those corals start to die again.
Oh no, because
yeah.
the tourists have arrived again. We human
Yeah.
people, we people are
Yeah,
such
we ruin
hazards.
things a lot. That's why we need to kind of be more aware about the stuff
Yes.
that we do and the footprints that we leave behind.
But it's such a simple
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
It's such a simple thing that can have such a great impact, you know. Leon, thank you so much for
Thanks,
your
Leon.
time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for what you do. And please enjoy Bali, and we hope you get to save more coral
Yeah,
reefs.
continue your efforts. We'll try to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, I'm going diving now. So.
All right,
Ah,
great
yes.
stuff.
Thank you.
All right, you guys can find out more about Living Seas online as well. Take
Yes.
care.
So it's a really interesting call.
Yeah.
For me, the new note was that you can't wear sunscreens because that's also it's also very hazardous to the coral.
Yeah, because plastics is something that we're all, excuse me, aware of, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're all trying.
Yeah.